I'm Wendy Worden, the Programs and Services Coordinator for the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, and I'm happy to be here with all of you tonight. As we get started this evening, we would like to take a moment and acknowledge the Dakota people as Indigenous keepers of the land from which I'm broadcasting tonight. This land was reserved by the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people as fellow Indigenous inhabitants in this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe people are the original stewards of stories in this place now called Minnesota, and we at the Friends honor that tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we work to lift up storytellers in our state today. The Fireside Reading Series is the Friends' longest running program, celebrating 28 seasons in partnership with the Hamlin Midway Library. Fireside is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, and special thanks to our new sponsor, our neighbors down Snelling, Minnesota United. We're so grateful for your support and your presence here this evening. We will begin with a reading from both of our authors. We're excited to have two friends with us. And I will be following up the program with a brief survey for your feedback, so do be on the lookout for that. We have partnered with Next Chapter bookseller in St. Paul, and they have created a page with our featured books, and they will be providing book sales at the in-person event at the end of February. I'm going to give my own voice a break this evening and introduce, as I said, two fantastic writers for young audiences, Payal Doshi and Reena Heisel. Pyle has an MFA in fiction writing from the New School, New York. She's lived in the UK and the US and noticed a lack of Indian protagonists in global children's fiction and wrote then the opening paragraph to what would become her first children's novel. Pyle was born and raised in Mumbai and currently lives in Minneapolis with her husband and her daughter. And Reena Heisel, who will be having me moderating honors this evening, has written scripts for many natural science themed documentaries and magazine segments. She produced educational television programs for South Dakota Public Broadcasting for 11 years and has found lots of inspiration in that subject matter for her book, Journey Beyond the Burrow. So I would really love to turn it over then to Reena. And as you have questions, of course, please feel free to drop them in the chat. And that's it from me for a while. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Wendy. And thank you to the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library for hosting the Fireside Reading Series. I know that I am so excited to be here. Payal is so excited to be here. My friend and fellow 2021 debut author, Payal Doshi. She is author of the middle grade fantasy Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar. And we are going to talk everything middle grade tonight. Fantasy, inspiration, world building, and the unexpected ways our two books are actually fairly similar, even though you may not think that just by looking at the covers. So we'll get started by saying hello to Payal for a little introduction. And if you want to tell us a little bit about Rhea and give us maybe a little sample reading.
Thank you so much, Reena. I'm so happy to be here with you, hanging out, talking shop. And special thank you again to Wendy and the Friends of St. Paul Library. This is awesome. Thank you so much for having us. So my book called Rhea and the Blood of the Nectar, and it is a middle grade fantasy about 12-year-old Rhea who lives in Darjeeling, India. And on the night of her 12th birthday, she has a huge fight with her brother, who's also her twin. And after the night ends, she finds out that he has gone missing. And what ensues is a secret and thrilling adventure where Rhea goes on a quest to go find Rohan and then finds out dark secrets about her past, has to battle some very evil creatures, and hopefully save her brother as well as the magical realm of Astranthia. This book is a book that I would have loved to have read as a kid, because I never saw a girl like me from India ever on the cover of a book, or let alone be in the pages of a book as a character, or as a well-represented character, at least, especially in children's books. And so This is me writing for my 12-year-old self that has this badass, fierce, flawed female protagonist of doing amazing, adventurous things, being a hero, saving the world. So I'm going to read a little snippet from the earlier part of the book. I've actually never read this piece before in the panels that I have done. So I'm quite excited to read this too. And so also, if I make any, if I fumble because I haven't read this in a long time, please excuse me. So this is, so at this part of the book, Ria's brother Rohan has gone missing, and obviously nobody knows where he is. And Ria lives in this small little town or village, I should say, in Darjeeling. Darjeeling is full of tea plantations. And there's this little village in which there's a fortune teller by the name Mishti Daadi. And she's known to read palms and reveal the future. Now, Ria has never met her before, and Mishti Daadi has quite a famous and infamous reputation. But she's so desperate to know what's happened to Rohan that she and her neighbor, Leela, who's as old as she, decide to go and secretly visit Mishti Daadi to see if she can reveal any answers about Rohan. So this is where they've entered her house and they've just met her. And all right, here we go. Welcome to my humble abode, Mishti Daadi said. How may I be of assistance? Can we please have some water? Leela said. Of course, Leela dearie, make yourselves at home. Ria, would you like some bandages? Bandages? Ria rushed to cover the scratches on her arms from the mosquito bites in the forest of Sonobor. No, I'm fine, thank you. Very well. Oh God, Leela said the moment Mishti Daadi was out of sight. I feel like throwing up a little. Why? I thought you knew her. I know of her, and how does she know our names? Ria's heart forgot to beat for a moment. Had Amma told her about them? Or had she known through her powers of foresight that they were coming to see her? Both possibilities freaked her out a little. I'm sure you dearies are hungry after your journey here. Mishti Daadi reappeared, carrying a tray with 2 glasses, a jug of water, and a plate of jam biscuits. She set it on the table. Ria gave her a shaky smile, while Leela gulped down her water and grabbed 3 biscuits. So, dearies, what can an old lady do for you? Her bleary eyes rolled onto Ria. They had the appearance of rotten grapes. I was told you could read palms and reveal answers. And do you have some important questions? Ria nodded. Well, you've come to the right place. I do pride myself in being a bit of a thermatologist, she grinned, the gaps in her teeth showing. A bit of a what? Asked Leela. A glop of jam hung from the corner of her mouth. Mishti Daadi ignored her. But first, I must get my things, she said and left the room. Ria and Leela looked at each other nervously. A loud clanging sounded and Mishti Daadi returned, lugging a heavy sack. Leela jumped off her chair to help. Not to worry, dearie, I'll manage. Mishti Daadi dug her hands into the toast-colored sack and delicately removed its contents. Holding each piece to eye level, she admired them as if recollecting a memory, and proceeded to arrange them until the table was covered with all kinds of thingamabobs. There were relics, dusty scrolls, bundles of sandalwood sticks, sprigs of tulsi leaves, knotted balls of raven-colored petals, a dozen decanters filled with potions, and several other objects Ria couldn't make sense of. Mishti Daadi, how much will this cost? I only have 60 rupees. Mishti Daadi's face softened. You don't have to worry, dearie. If I answer your question satisfactorily, you can give me whatever your heart desires. I want to help, not steal from the desperate and frightened, as some might think. A blush creeped over Ria. She was guilty of thinking something very much like that about others in the past. Silence now. We begin the augury. Mishti Daadi tapped her fingers on her forehead and placed Ria's arms on the table. She lifted the lid of a crystal carafe and drizzled a sapphire-hued liquid on Ria's palms. To expunge the murkiness, she explained. The liquid was thick on Ria's skin, and a chill entered every pore of her body. She felt like an empty receptacle, clean and open. Satisfied with the cleansing, Mishti Daadi plucked 2 of the darkest petals from the flower balls and placed them on Ria's palms. They looked like scraps of a moonless night resting on a pillow of snow. Ria glanced at the cuckoo clock hanging opposite her. She had an hour before she needed to head back home. Mishti Daadi closed her eyes and tossed her head backwards. Bakara Sintera Verifera. An incantation in a peculiar tongue poured from her lips, and the air around Rhea tightened. With her eyes still sealed, Mishti Daadi picked a pair of shiny stones and swapped their positions in time to keep with her chanting. In the swiftness of her movements, the light reflecting off their surfaces sent dazzling sparkles across the room. The invocation grew louder, and a force pressed down on Rhea's palms. The petals levitated. Rhea watched with open eyes, and Leela's jaw dropped. White hair unraveled from Mishti Daadi's bun, and her bony hands with bulging spider veins shook with great intensity. Rhea desperately fought the urge to scream, the burden on her palms unbearable. She yelled for Mishti Daadi to stop, but the old woman didn't seem to hear. Mishti Daadi's eyes rolled to the back of her head. The chairs, the tables, and all its contents shuddered violently, reaching a deafening crescendo. The lights died, and Leela screamed. Rhea moaned, her mind blanking out. Mishti Daadi, please stop. The lights spluttered back on, starkly bright. Everything came to a spine-chilling standstill. Leela's face lolled to the side. The horrible pressure on her palms had disappeared. Mishti Daadi's eyes were wide open as if pinned to her eyebrows. Her irises were deathly black, and in the center was the white dot. Speak, dearie, of what you desire to seek, she asked in a honeyed but distant tone.
Oh my gosh, Pyle, I'm so glad you read that scene.
Okay, good.
Oh my gosh. So yeah, Rhea and Blood of the Nectar, that is one, I was gonna say one of my favorite scenes, but you've got so many rich, the physical, like Mishti Daadi's, the physical descriptions. I mean, all of that is just, that was very fun to hear you read that, because yes, I have not heard you read that out loud yourself yet. So that was quite a nice treat.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm going to read just a couple pages from my book, which is animal fantasy called Journey Beyond the Burrow. And this is the story of a young mouse named Tobin who lives in the forest, where all the mice must follow these rules to survive. They're called the rules of rodentia. And Tobin knows these rules by heart. He has been practicing them since he was a little pinkling, and he has always followed them. He is top of the class as a junior weather scout. He takes this very seriously. But one night after a storm, the Great Burrow is invaded by a bunch of marauding giant arachnids. They're these monstrous spiders that the mice have never seen before. And Tobin's baby sibling, which is just a little pinkling, is abducted by one of the spiders. And Tobin does something he's never done before, which is he's made a choice. He's actually going to break one of the rules of rodentia, which is to never pursue a predator. But he decides, if I have any shot of saving my little sibling, I need to chase after the spider and see where it is taking him or her. We don't know at this point in the story. So he's accompanied though by his little sister Talia and his best friend Wiley. And they track the 8-legged monsters through the woods using the rules of rodentia as a guide. They dodge predators and navigate dangerous terrain. They meet some unlikely allies along the way. And Tobin has to make decisions about when to follow the rules and knowing when he needs to break them, because this is unprecedented territory for a mouse from the Great Burrow. So I'm going to read a little bit of the first chapter as we kind of get to know Tobin and his world. Crouched in perfect stillness beneath a toadstool, Tobin sniffed the air, wet with a faint metallic odor. A storm was coming, a big one. Lightning for sure. Not a good day for a mouse to venture too far from the Great Burrow. Tobin lifted his nose to the breeze again, performing the junior weather scout procedures dutifully. Sniff the air, search the air, feel the air. He didn't even need all 3 steps today. The odor of rain was obvious. The clouds sat heaped in the sky like a row of giant bears. And as for feeling the air, his tan and black speckled fur was already clumped together from the humidity. For the third time that afternoon, Tobin rubbed his cheeks, fluffing out his fur and whiskers. After all, whiskers used properly are a fine-tuned sensory tool. Drooping whiskers can't do their job. Speaking of which, Tobin sighed. He had a job to do, and he was only halfway done. Junior Weather Scouts needed to deliver their reports too. From beneath the cover of the toadstool cap, Tobin looked toward home. The great burrow hunched against the earth like a giant tortoiseshell, a perfectly sculpted mud clump conveniently located beside an unruly patch of blue thistle. Hidden to the untrained eye, a dozen entrances dotted the great burrow, carefully concealed by knots of moss and dangling roots. It was important to always use different entrances, exits, and paths while going in and out of the great burrow. So important, in fact, it was an official rule of rodentia, the survival code for all mice of the burrow. Rule number 7. A predictable path provides easy pickings for a predator. Tobin chose an entrance he hadn't used in a while. Left side, just behind a patch of crabgrass. Next, he ticked through the age-old mental checklist taught to all youngling mice. Scan the sky. Done. No birds of prey. Scan for ground predators. No trembling grass. Scan the breeze. The scents are safe. Clover, thistle, and honeysuckle. The muscles in his hind legs twitched. Go. Tobin ran, darting a zig, then a zag, enough to throw off a pouncing predator. With a final leap between blades of crabgrass, he was inside the safe confines of the great burrow. He blinked, waiting for his eyes to adjust to the dark inner tunnels. Only then did he tread towards his family's quarters. Memories of his morning crept into his thoughts, and his paws slowed. Nothing but chaos waited at home. Why did his dad have to tell all the neighbors the pinkling was coming today? Now their den was packed with elder mice waiting for baby news. But at least his Weather Scout status gave Tobin an excuse for fresh air, as he offered to make as many trips as the elder mice wanted. Because nothing, repeat nothing, excites elder mice like new babies and a weather report. Okay, so there's a little peek into Tobin's world.
I love that. That you're so lucky that the first few pages give such a quick insight into Tobin, who's just the most incredibly endearing character, and sets the scene. I mean, even with him just navigating all of these mice in his burrow, waiting for this little pinkling to be born. There's so much humor in your story too, which is real.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we it's kind of funny because this is one of the first instances with Payal and I similarities is the fantasy, the giant quest, the sibling stories, the worlds are probably developing friendships, unexpected allies. The biggest difference would probably be our two worlds, because mine is woodland forest, and with yours you have kind of the portal fantasy where you're going between two worlds, although it seems more complicated to me than just saying portal fantasy. But we have the towns. Well, I guess Ria's town does not officially have a name, but where she is and her area, and then Astranthia. And I would love for you to share a little insight into your world building, especially with how you kind of had to push back to hold your vision for what you wanted your fantasy world to be.
Yeah, so absolutely. So I had two main things that I wanted to achieve with both the worlds. I remember back when I was getting my MFA done, and obviously this book was in draft form. I had to workshop the first chapter, and so the class read it, and then they had to give me their comments. And what I was really surprised to find out was that they were praising the descriptions of this fantasy world, and it's so wonderful, and we feel so immersed in it, blah blah blah. And then I was just like, wait a second, we're still on Earth, like we're in India, we're in Darjeeling, we're not in the fantasy land yet. And that was one of my big lessons right there, is that when you're writing, again, outside of the typical Western settings, anything seems exotic and seems fantastical. And so I had to really bear in mind when I was writing the India section of the book that to still keep it very grounded. I love writing immersively. To me, any world building, even if you're writing a contemporary novel, should soak all your senses. You should be able to see, smell, hear, touch, feel, and that's those are the rules that I applied when writing both the worlds. But for the India part, I had to make sure I wasn't making it sound too beautiful or too immersive. So that was the thing. So when I was writing India, I wanted to keep it grounded and rooted to Ria's life and all of her daily activities. But then when I was writing Astranthia, I wanted to be this, like in my mind, I'm thinking these kids or, Ria's going to escape into this fantastical land. And I thought, how wonderful would it be to be a land where you can't really place it on the map? That if you read it, you wouldn't be like, oh, this is in the West or this is in the East, because again, writing from a South Asian, perspective, everything I write becomes about my South Asian experience. It's all about, let's talk about the Indian stuff or the Indianness. And as amazing as that is, it's not something that I wanted to be the driving force of the story. The driving force of the story, these characters, these human characters with very human qualities and issues and things like that. So when I was writing Astranthia, I wanted it to be this East meets West kind of a world. It's also very much like my childhood that I had growing up in Bombay, in Mumbai, a millennial. So I had family in the US who would come down, I would visit. I grew up listening to the Backstreet Boys. We're heavily influenced by British literature because of, colonization, yay. But you have so much of those influences along with, my Indian life and surrounded by Indian, literally everything Indian. So I had such a mix of both cultures growing up that I wanted to reflect that in Astranthia. So in Astranthia, there are Celtic references, there are Indian references, there are British references, there are references from, again, different parts of India. So it's like this mishmash. So that was my view and my mission in creating Astranthia. I wanted it to be a land in which people did not differentiate between races and nationality and color. They have their own problems, no doubt, but those were not the issues. Kind of this utopian world that we would live in if we ever could. So that was Astranthia for me. And the funny thing is, when I was pitching to sell this book, I got a lot of pushback on the fantasy land, because they would say that it's really pretty and it's beautiful and it's immersive and we love it, but it wasn't Indian enough. And that's when I realized that, wow, selling a book is really a business, because they were like, it's very difficult for us to sell this book or market this book as an Indian inspired fantasy, because they're only in India for 1/3 of the book. But I was like, but the characters are Indian and you get to see a lot of that. But, again, the idea for them is, oh, we can pitch this as an Indian inspired fantasy. My book does not have mythological elements. It doesn't take from Indian myths, so it couldn't be pitched as an Indian mythology. Anyway, so I had to battle with that, and I said, no, I refuse to change it. And I'm really glad I did, because at one point it was a very difficult thing to say, because it just felt like this book was not going anywhere. So yeah, that was my experience with creating these two different worlds in Ria.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump too far ahead in as far as the publishing process part of the discussion, but it also talks to how subjective everything can be, and how finding just that right agent and that right editor, because if I recall, you were ready to start on like the next thing, because you tried so often and gotten so much pushback.
Oh yeah, I just couldn't sell the book to an agent, because I had a really good response rate for agents to read my full manuscript. But then I kept hearing this. I heard things like, oh, can we have them spend more time in India before they go off on the quest? But I was like, because they wanted to see the hardship life of this poor family who are tea pickers. And I was like, yeah, but her brother has just gone missing. There's no reason for me to spend another day in the life of Ria. So it was very interesting to see that. And then I thought that this book is never going to see the light of day. And so I had my week of absolute sobbing and crying. And then I decided to write another book, or at least, and so I thought of a whole other idea and I outlined it. And then that's when I received the email from my publisher who said that they wanted to publish it. And I was so happy, but I had to hold it back, because I wanted to speak to the editor before I said yes, because what if she or he said that you have to change Astranthia? And Astranthia had become such a huge part of this book for me because it symbolized so much more than just a fantasy world. It was this world that, you know, this utopian world, but also it represents my sort of childhood and upbringing. And I can say for a lot of Indians who came from bigger cities, who had that blend of experiences. And again, there's no one South Asian narrative or one narrative from one culture ever, right? And so it became something I really stood steadfastly with. And then my editor, she's white, and I was so nervous at the time, but she had other comments about the book that we needed to fix and add on, but it had nothing to do with Astranthia, and she got it, and it was the biggest sigh of relief that I had, and yeah.
That's funny because that is yet another thing we have in common, because I had kind of a crazy experience trying to find an agent, and I was almost ready to be like, okay, you know what, maybe the animal fantasy is not going to take off right now, so I better start working on my next few things. And then lo and behold, that's when I got a call from who is now my agent, Marlo Berliner. So but as far as the world building, I will answer my part of it. I got off a little easier on the world building because it is kind of taken from the natural world. And at the time I was working as a producer for South Dakota Public Broadcasting. When I got the idea for the story, I was out doing a shoot in the Black Hills, and we were getting lots of video of Black Hills reptiles and amphibians. Funny enough, you don't think of them in Black Hills so much. And then we were also getting some video close time-wise of a few bat colonies. And I just started thinking about these secret worlds, because, you know, you're just kind of isolated out there with your camera for a while, hoping that they'll pop out and you can get good shots of all the little critters. And a combination of that, and then going to I had a story at the South Dakota Festival of the Book. They have that every year. And I was supposed to be just getting some video of this author talk just to kind of highlight the event. But I just started getting sucked into all the lectures and thinking, oh my gosh, I love creative writing. I miss creative writing. And just this thing clicked. And so I could not get the idea of the animal worlds out of my mind because I had seen so much of them. So the fantasy element for me was figuring out how they could communicate. Mm-hmm. So for Toba and Talia, all the mice, of course, can communicate. And then I created this thing called rodent tongue, which meant all rodent species can pretty much communicate. But if they're going to communicate with, say, an owl or a snake, which they are kind of forced to do at some point or another, it has to be a very specially trained, like an interpreter of some kind or something. And, you know, it's fantasy. It's a hard balance for me, was trying to keep it somewhat realistic. Like there's predator and prey, and there's some symbiotic relationships, and how a couple of species may team up for and
common gain.
Yes, right. And so that was my balance, was trying to keep it feeling like this could be in a forest in your town somewhere, but also, you know, they are talking to each other. And the arachne spiders are actually like this amalgamation of like 3 different kinds of spiders. I looked up like the scariest, most terrifying spiders you could, and just mushed them all together. But yeah, so for me, the fantasy is not as your fantasy world, Astranthia. Oh my gosh, the vivid, the flowers, the colors, the magic, the creatures. It's amazing. Like I would love to go there sometime.
That's you know, I should have mentioned that for me, the other thing when I was working on Astranthia was that I just wanted to be really fresh. And thinking with that, I was like, I wanted to put in the theme of flowers in it, because nature is also a very important part in my book, because it's very closely related to the magic system, which is derived from nectar. And so obviously there's this, so it's very close to flowers and nature. And so I wanted to keep that theme sort of symbolic through the book. But what I would always want to ask you is that through the book, you keep having, you know, your rules keep popping up. And sometimes it's rule 7, sometimes it's rule, 54. So did you ever do you have the rules of rodentia? Do you actually have 1 to whatever number there is? And yeah, when I read this, when I was reading this book, it felt like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, but like nice version. And that was really cool because I actually felt like Tobin. And that's where I think you do such a good job with your, even though it's the real world and it's woodlands, but it feels real, but at the same time fantastical, because as a reader you sort of inhabit Tobin and you really do look at the world through his eyes, and how just a leaf can be so big, a hawk can be so massive in the sky that it feels like this dragon really sort of swooping down. So yeah, I wanted to
Thank you.
rules. Like, did you ever have them written down before? I had no rules written down.
I did not at first. And it was one of my critique group members, Eagle Eye critique group member, that was like, didn't you already have a rule 13? I'm like, oh, I better. So I did a Google Doc, or a little doc search in Word, and went through all my rules, and I was like, okay, I'm definitely gonna need to like copy and paste and make a new little document to keep track of all the different rules that they have, because I was totally writing duplicate numbers and was not quite keeping track of that yet, because it just was too involved in the plot and like trying to move things along. And then it was like, oh yeah, I better actually create this rule book. Yeah. And so there is a master rule guide, and I just want to say thank you about the Tobin, the mouse eye view of the world. That is like my biggest, I love hearing that. That is, so my mother-in-law, she lives out in the country in South Dakota, and she was talking about how she would see mice running around like their shrubs or toward their outbuildings, and she was like, gosh, and now when I look at them, I think of Tobin and how, whoa, I wonder what they do in the winter. And so for me, that is just like the biggest compliment ever, is getting that perception. And that I think is one of the cool things about fantasy worlds, and fantasy is just that little line of reality and kind of making you think perceptions, which brings me to a question that I know Wendy, someone had sent to her earlier in the week, which was having these fantasy magical settings and why they lend themselves so well, whether it's kingdoms or animal worlds, to working in messages and issues and things that matter to kids, and kind of having it in this sort of safe space where you can deal with these bigger issues, but you're not beating them over the head kind of with it. You have this fantastical background.
Exactly. And this is why, I love middle grade. And I think middle grade is such an amazing age group to write for, because you get to do this. You get to talk about real life issues and big emotions while straddling these adventurous realms and quests and things like that. Middle grade is the time, I feel like, when kids become hyper aware of the world around them. They're like mini adults in making. I feel like that's when I think back to my earliest memories that I can think of, not what my mother has told me about or my dad. I think back to when I was 10. Like, I can vividly remember those years. What I was doing at 8, 5, literally, I have no idea. But 10, I remember, and 10 and beyond. And I think there's such formative years in a child's life and a kid's life. I think that's the time they're setting the foundation of who they will become. And this is the time they start sort of, looking at the world around them with different eyes. They're beginning to see themselves in a new light. They're trying to figure out who they are, who their friends are, who they want their friends to be, what they look like what's happening at home, why are mom and dad fighting. Like, there's so many things that they start becoming aware of, and leading to really big emotions. And with fantasy stories, it's so great because there is this, in both our stories, there's such a deep layer of these real world issues that our characters are going through. For example, in Rhea, she comes from a family that's not wealthy. They come from, lower means. She doesn't have a dad. Her dad died when she was a little baby, and nobody talks about it. And there's this air of mystery and secrets around him, and it really affects her that nobody in the family, especially her mother and grandmother, just refuse to talk about it. That has then affected her relationship with her mother, and they have a very distant relationship. I mean, Ria wants to be closer, but her mother keeps pushing her away, she's cold. And that's also another sort of play on the Indian mother stereotype that I wanted to incorporate in the book. Many people, especially back in India, we grew up thinking like, divorces didn't really happen in India because everyone always stays together. We live in these big joint families and everybody's happy. But the truth is not, absolutely not. And I saw that with my friends and my friends' families in middle school, where, parents were not happy, but they were still together, some divorced, it was all hush hush. There was all of these things happening. And so in this book, I wanted to, show a story of a family dynamic that actually isn't that unique. It is pretty common. Now people are talking about, dysfunctional families and like trying to talk about mental health. And so the pressures that things like that have on little girls and boys as they grow up and they're trying to figure out the world and navigate the world, and her relationship with her mother, which really does play a part in Ria's character, like it has affected her deeply. And I get to explore that because of that relationship. She's not a trusting person. She's not a loyal. She doesn't believe, or she doesn't understand loyalty in friendship. So she doesn't have any friends. She keeps thinking if she meets somebody or she makes a friend, they're going to leave her. They're going to abandon her. They're going to just suddenly, disassociate from her. Even with her own brother, they were really close. But then as, they entered middle school, he's a more extroverted kid and he sort of, went off and played his cricket, his sports, he has friends, and she just sort of crawled into her own little shell. And it's so great that I can explore this subject, but have it woven into fantasy and mystery and solving quests. And it gives me the opportunity to show Ria's strengths and like puzzle solving and mystery solving and battling these feelings as she's befriending her neighbor, and they're slowly, a friendship is blossoming there, but I can show how it takes time. And it's and like you said, it's not heavy-handed, because right. You can always, add in levity, or you can add in drama because of, some obstacle that has suddenly come. And then that gives us such a great opportunity to, again, explore other different human real life dynamics. That's why I absolutely love writing middle grade with fantasy.
Yes, I completely agree. And I remember also as a kid, I was attracted to the books that had castles and dragons or ghost stories, but just as much as, all those fantastical elements, I liked reading about, especially exploring friendships and the sibling stories. And in your book, one of the things with Ria, her relationship with Leah.
Yeah.
When she realizes, because she thinks that her friend is from this big, perfect family and they just must have all the fun in the world. And then she's shocked when her friend, kind of drops the truth on her. She's like, well, I was gone for like 2 days. Nobody noticed.
Yep.
And she was shocked. Ria was like, oh my gosh. And it's like those little, you are exploring these fantasy worlds, but at middle grade, they're also learning so much about interpersonal relationships. And I think just having the backdrop of the fantastical that you can always dive back into, like if Tobin and Wiley are having kind of a discussion about if he's being too risky and he wants to keep things a little safer because after all, he has his little sister with him, and things can get a little deep that way. And then it's, there's, okay, but I smell a fox now, so we got to move on and we'll get back to this. And, we got to.
And what I really love is also it gives us, and just generally stories, and especially in middle grade, like, for example, Tobin is a boy, but he is a bit timid. He is shy. He is the opposite of what one typically would expect from a boy, in a sense. Wiley is more like that. He's like, on the fly. He's the risk taker. He's like, let's do this. That's, he's probably more impulsive. And Tobin really, he's the more introverted, more insecure, more timid, but still so brave and courageous and thinks on his feet, even though he thinks it out and thinks rationally. And it gives us the opportunity to show these different types of characters that kids are and are a part of all of us, because we have these great big things that they have to solve and do, and it's fun. It doesn't hit the kids on the head to say do this or do that, but it gives them hope, and empowers them.
Yes, I think that is one of the greatest things about middle grade is usually, and I've heard this at conferences, I've heard this in my critique groups, everything is, you kind of always want to end with a little bit of hope.
Yes.
Things can get dark, and, there's middle grade across the spectrum that.
On loss, on grief. Some of our own fellow debut authors have written such incredible books about that, and they handle those topics so well. But because it's middle grade, there's a little bit of humor in there. There's a lot of hope. And it's such a great way to explore these big issues in a way that's relatable and not scary for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
Fun. It can be.
Yes, exactly. So, as we sit here and profess our love for middle grade, I am curious, when you got the writing bug, when you got the itch,
yeah.
Was it instantly for middle grade? Or were you reading lots of books and zeroed in on middle grade?
No, so I got my itch when I was 23 years old. And it came out of pure frustration at a job that I was at. I was working at a magazine publishing house, and I was their features writer for a lifestyle magazine. And I was getting absolutely no joy in writing the articles that I was writing. And I was like, I just want to write what I want to write, because, with magazines, the editor, you have themes, and then the editor sort of talks about what they want in the issue. And then, so, it's always geared towards a theme. And so I was like, I just want to write what I want to write. And I didn't even know what that was. I was just so frustrated. I remember it was a Saturday morning. I powered up my laptop. I had my coffee, and I was like, I'm just going to write something. And I wrote 2 paragraphs, and it was about an 8-year-old girl. Oh, well, this is also very interesting. It's about an 8-year-old girl called Rose. And she goes off into these forbidden woods behind her house. And something magical / mysterious happens with a banyan tree. And she is freaked out and she runs out, but she's also very, very intrigued by what has happened. And I wrote those 2 paragraphs, and I had never felt happier in my life. It just sort of opened, I don't know, the floodgates or something. And I'm like, this is what I wanted to do. This is what I want to do. And so I was 23, like I said, and I think what it was is that I wrote a story. I think it had so many things that I hadn't even thought about. I think I was meant to write this story, of this brown little kid, doing these amazing things, because I had not seen that. And at the time, I think my love for reading began when I was in middle school. Like, I just fell in love with reading when I was around 10 or 11 years old. And that has taken me through, adulthood. And so I think I went back to my happiest place as a reader and sort of wrote this story. But I should say, I wrote the entire first draft with white characters. Like I said, Rose was Rhea now, but she was Rose. Rohan was Bryant. Their mother was called Hyacinth. They lived in the UK somewhere. It was the English countryside. They had scones for breakfast. It was a life that I did not ever lead. I believe I had not even visited London or England at that time in my life. And I wrote this whole story, which the plot is exactly the same. It was Rhea at the time it was like Rose going to save her brother Bryant, who was kidnapped. So I wrote the whole thing, had experiences, I put in experiences and a lifestyle that I'd never read about, I'd never lived, I'd only read about. And never once in those how many ever months that I spent did I think for 1 second, why am I not writing about my experiences or me as an Indian girl and living in India? And like, it didn't occur to me until a writing teacher, she was just sort of defeated in her look, and she asked me point blank, why aren't you writing about Indian kids? And I remember taking it so personally and going like, so what? Like, so what if I'm not? Like, why aren't you praising me for my writing or the story or whatever? And I was really upset at her. And I was coming back in the cab, I remember. And then I was like, but like, why didn't I?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it just changed for me. It completely changed for me. And I decided to obviously, incorporate all of my, all of the Indian elements that I wanted in this book. But I knew two things. I knew that I didn't want it to be the central focus of the book, where everything about it was about India. This is not a textbook about Indian culture. This is just these are just seamless details in the same way you have when you're reading about a story about a white character. And also that this was going to be a happy, like a brown joy story, a story that is not rooted in the heavier topics of South Asian culture or immigration or topics that get more frequently published and talked about when it comes to writing about South Asian kids or people. So this was a story that is a story literally of my heart, of this kid who's going off doing amazing things. She just happens to be Indian, but every kid can relate to it, and this wild ride and adventure. So yeah, I did just default to middle grade. It has my heart.
Yes.
What about you?
Oh, so actually, we have a question that popped in. Do either or both of you have young adults, teens that you chat with to get some direction for ideas that are timely? Oh my goodness.
Okay,
yes,
because you have kiddos that are that age. Yeah.
I am so fortunate in this regard. I have a built-in 13-year-old who is about to turn 14 next month, and an 8-year-old who is going on 9. And oh my goodness, yes, they are a wealth of knowledge, just listening. Over the summer, if I'm driving to softball and I have 3 girls sitting in the van just chatting away, just kind of hearing what are they worried about, like what are the things that they're talking about, and something that could be super outrageous one minute, it's absolutely fine the next day, and then just like things that you remember that you're like, oh yeah, boy, they had went on from that, or the things that do stick with them for a long time are interesting. And I will say they help me in other ways too, like so book talk is becoming popular, right? So it started with
yes
because I'm like mid-40s, so for me it was Facebook. Learning how to do Facebook, then learning Twitter, and then Instagram. Oh gosh, I still like, I have this 13-year-old where I'm like, what's a story? What's my feed? Why are there different places to put these things? Like, so I actually lean on her quite a bit for this. So then, as you know, in some of the author groups, people were talking about the pros and cons of book talk going on TikTok. And the look on her face when I said, do you think I should start a TikTok account and start like some book talk stuff? And she's just like, no, I don't. I think your Instagram is probably good enough.
And you can even draw from for any of your books all from
oh my gosh, yes.
You can get from them directly.
Right, exactly that. If I need any inspiration, I can just walk across the hall. Like if I need facial features, just say to her, so Lily, I am going to start working in your school cafeteria tomorrow. And then just watch her face. You're like, okay, we've got the jaw drop. We've got.
Yeah, and see, I have a 3-year-old, so I don't have that in my home. So I do 2 things. One is I really draw from my own memories growing up as a preteen, and kind of the things that we all sort of experience. And also I have to say, like, Netflix and stuff is really good. Yes. I mean, seeing different TV shows based around, the teenage experience also really helps me to sort of, again, remember and be like, oh yeah, that's a really good thing. Like, for example, in the sequel that I'm writing right now, it happens a year after the book ends. So in this book, they've just turned 12. So in the sequel, they're now 13. And so, when I plotted it out, I did not think about this. But as I'm working through the revision of the draft, I'm like, maybe I should think about if someone has a crush on somebody, or maybe if those feelings, if there, is anything developing or some thoughts are coming into their heads. I should think about this, even though I want to keep my characters very PG. I'm like, but this is, again, it would be abnormal not to include it. But I wrote the whole first draft without any mention of any of that. And then as I ruminate, and again, I'm listening to or watching things, and that it's sort of like, I'm like, oh yeah, I should include. So then I'll make a little note. And then when I'm revising, I will think about where I can put in a certain scene that sort of talks to that. And then, and for Ria, I had, obviously way before publication, I had 3 10-year-olds read the book, because I really wanted to know if my dialogue held up. Because it's not, again, this book is not dated, it's not put on, there's no year that it takes place in, but it's pretty contemporary lingo, I would say. But it's not as contemporary as well, because I'm in my mid-30s, and that I'm like, for me, TikTok is just no way. I don't even know what to do. I don't even have a reel on Instagram. I'm good with posting on Instagram. Yeah. So I'm like, you hear things like stan this and ship this, and they should, and
the shipping, yeah,
shipping and the standing and all of these things. And my book is not that fancy, so it's still based on the time when I was younger. So I was very nervous that these kids would read it and just be like, feel like it's dated. But that's why, again, beta readers, and if you're writing middle grade books, I highly recommend having at least one kid who you don't know, or who's happy to give you an honest opinion, because they're very happy to give honest opinions. Read your book before you send it out to an agent.
Yeah, and as you were saying, you were drawing on your own childhood experiences. I mean, really, it is amazing how much that holds up. Like, those were super formative years for me, because we moved when I was in middle school, and like my emotions were raw. Mm-hmm. So much of that sticks with me. That is the year I was probably the most avid reader in my life, because I didn't know anybody. And so it was just, and so you can draw on those things and have a lot of authenticity. You don't have to have the kids running around really, and they will tell you, even at workshops and stuff, beware some of the jargon and the lingo, because they're talking about standing and shipping and stuff right now, but 5 years from now, when the book actually might then that might be outdated already.
Absolutely right. That is so true. And and for me, when I was, I think 11 is when I started developing my female friendships and building those really close friendships. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wrote about Ria and Leela, where they were not friends. They're not friends before the book, or as the book begins. And then that slowly sort of develops through the book. And now when I'm thinking of it, I'm like, that's probably something subconsciously that came in, that for some reason, I just didn't have them be best friends in the book at the beginning, where there's so many books where you already have that. And that, but it wasn't a conscious choice not to do it when I was writing the book. It was just something that organically came to me. And it's probably that. Because
I am so glad you did it that way, because I think that is just such a joy in your book, is watching Ria try to navigate these friendship waters, which is clearly she's not quite comfortable with this yet. So we have another question, maybe we can hit quick. I'll let you handle this one first. Do you see any universal preteen issues which soar above individuals' culture? You see universal,
which I would say everything, and it's kind of, both our books are testament to that. When you're reading Ria, from what I've heard from readers, and what I hope is that you don't feel like you're reading about a 12-year-old Indian kid's issues. Mm-hmm. But in your book, you don't feel like you're reading about a mouse's issues. You just forget that in your book that you're inhabiting a mouse's point of view, and in my book that you're inhabiting a 12-year-old Indian girl's point of view. I think human issues soar beyond any culture in any community, and like with Ria, she's really, she's working on trust issues. She is working on finding and making friends and understanding the meaning of friendship. She is trying to figure out her family dynamics and understand why her mom's the way she is. She's trying to understand, she's also trying to better her relationship with her brother. She has the, the very typical love-hate relationship with your sibling. She's trying to figure out who she is. There's this push and pull that's happening within her. She's learning to allow people into herself, into her inner circle. She is also learning to be brave. She's learning to take risks. She's also realizing what's really important to her. There comes a pivotal point in the book where Leela's in real danger and she has to make a decision of whether she can save Leela's life or abandon that and go and rescue Rohan. Like, it's a very difficult decision for her to make. And so she's confronted with these really big questions in her life that question her morals, and she's figuring those things out. And I think that is why books are so wonderful. That is why I say I became I'm here a testament, being an author, a writer. I only grew up reading books that were outside of my culture and my known lived experience. And like, I think Anne of Green Gables is the book that did it for me. I love that book so much. And, there I was, an 11-year-old in Mumbai in my room reading this book, connecting completely with Anne, this girl, 12-year-old from Canada, again, a country I had never visited. I still haven't visited, actually. Relating to her on every level. I was every bit as a tomboy as she was. I would fly off the handle. I was a Spitfire. I got into trouble for that. I was very sporty and all of those different things. I was not your typical, what I read about in books back then with, girls being so proper. And so that's what makes our books, and just books, such windows and doors into everyone's experience, because you can relate to that human experience regardless of what that character looks like and comes from versus where you come from, and because our human struggles are universal. We all have similar hopes, dreams, ambitions to do better, to be better. And so, yeah, I don't think there's anything singularly that sets the cultures apart or issues.
That actually, you just reminded me of something that from a fantasy panel that we had talked about. We have some friends who have written Other 20 Wonders, Alyssa Wishengrad, with The Verdigris Pawn, is about questioning the system and authority. And that takes place in a complete fantasy world, but the themes would apply to a lot of kids in a lot of different culture situations. Like, it's my book, Rules of Rodentia, Tobin grows up and he is just steadfast, holds on to, these are the rules, this is what you do in the forest to survive. Oh, but now I'm torn because I don't want my mom to feel super sad about losing this little pinkling. What am I going to do? And so you have the questioning the system. We have grief, like we had mentioned early. That's another.
Even with your book, I mean, yeah, nobody obviously has, as humans, the rules of Rodentia, but we are all brought up with our own family rules that we're not supposed to break. We might have different curfews, so we all have curfews. And as girls, you have different rules. As boys, you get different rules. And it doesn't matter that the rules are not exactly the same, but the fact that you have to fight against those rules, or there comes a point when you have to break that rule, you can relate to that. I mean, I could relate to this house breaking a rule and needing to, and that's the really cool part.
Yes. Yeah. The world changes. Sometimes the rules have to. Yes.
This was really delightful. I'm now David Katz because I've had technology issues all over the place tonight. This is hilarious. So I am more than grateful, Reena, for your presence here, because what a night I've had. So, but it's been really, really amazing to listen to the two of you talk about your experiences writing and publishing and all of the things that books for children can do for kids, but also for for us as readers and as adults. It's just really, I loved this universality conversation as well, because I think that's one of the things that I take away, like, oh, I wish my brother would disappear,
Yeah.
but not really. I don't want my brother to disappear.
Sometimes you
Um,
feel that as an adult as well.
Well,
Yeah.
we've all thought that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You just these things that we fight with and must push against to become people.
And like I always like to say, middle grade is for ages 8 to 99 because it really is.
Mhm. Yeah, I have heard it called the golden age of literature, the golden age of reading. Like that's when you just so many different ideas and thoughts and different concepts that just open up to you. And it's like, it's good to revisit those every now and then.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yes. I don't know how many times I've read Charlotte's Web.
Oh, well, thank you, audience, for your attention this evening, and again, thank you from the bottom of my heart, Payal and Reena. It's just been a joy, and I love, yes, the secret garden.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my
Mhm.
goodness.
Everyone who, I mean, we can't see anybody's faces, so it's like feels
Yes.
the three of us, but thank you for to everyone who tuned in, and spent their 1 hour.
Yep. And we will be around February 26th at 1 p.m. in the front yard of Hamlin Midway Library. If you're in the Twin Cities, do come stop by and have some cocoa and talk to some authors. It'll be right fun. So, until then.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
So lovely. Have a great night, everyone.